Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers in Lagos. Authorities in Ghana are investigating circumstances that led to the drowning of 8 school children on Lake Volta in the southeastern region of the country. Local authorities say 12 other children who were on board the capsized boat survived the accident. The group was traveling from Atika Gome fishing village to the Wayokope community, where their school is located. Ghana's National Disaster Management Organization confirms that the bodies of 5 boys and 3 girls between the ages of 5 and 12 who died have been retrieved. The incident has ignited calls for the government to improve transport infrastructure in rural communities. Boat accidents are frequent on Lake Volta, partly due to overloading, poorly constructed boats, and the presence of tree stumps in the river. Let's bring in Ghanaian journalist Maxwell Agbagba, who joins us virtually from Accra in Ghana. Hello, Maxwell.
Yeah, hello, Joke. Hello, Joke.
So quite a sad situation, that incident. What are authorities saying about the survivors? What state are they in?
Well, we are told that children who survived, 12 of them who survived, are currently recuperating. And all those who survived are currently with their family, and some of them also with their guardians as well. But if you go to the community where these children are from, it's a state of mourning, for all of them, for all the people there, because they believe strongly. The people tell us that this is a big loss, for their community. One of the people I've been interacting with actually tells me that one of the children who lost, his life in this incident had a very promising future. The community saw him as one of the, potential who could, come out from the community and then, do something great for their community. So really, for all the children, 8 children that they've lost, it's a big loss, for the community, and they feel strongly that this was an avoidable incident. They say that if the children had been in life jackets, the situation, wouldn't have happened, but now it's a state of mourning when you go to the region where these children are from, the community where these children are from.
Right, so does this suggest that there has been no improvement in the travel facilities, such as the life jackets you mentioned? There are reports that, accidents like these are frequent on Lake Volta.
Well, the information that we have from the conversation that we had with the regional minister yesterday, he told us that the district assembly there has they have some life jackets. But the issue is getting parents to ensure that their children wear the life jacket before they get onto some of these boats that they use as a means of transportation in those island communities to school. But many of the community people who we spoke to also are raising the issue of accessibility. They say that sometimes they don't even get access to the life jackets that the regional minister is making references to. We are told that there are some private organizations that are into water safety, transportation, that usually help these children with some of these life jackets. But many times also, the life jackets are not enough, are not enough for the people who want to, go across, get across the river. So sometimes they are forced to get on these boats without the life jackets. But the information that we have from the regional minister is that, one, we're looking at partnering or collaborating with private organizations to make more of these life jackets accessible to the people. Secondly, also, they're looking at the district assemblies, the local authorities, also getting more of these, life jackets to make them available to these children as and when they need them.
So, Maxwell, are there no, alternative routes to these schools? Is it only through water, or is it that, the water transportation is faster to their schools? And if there are routes, why aren't these routes being explored?
Really, there are no alternative routes. because these are island communities on the Lake Volta. So for these island communities, what the people, the only means of transportation is by boat. So really, there are no alternatives, for the people. But what we've heard from the spokesperson of the Ghana's Ministry of Education is that they are trying to recruit indigenes from the community, some of these island communities, so the children would not be compelled to use boats as a means of transportation to cross to another community just to access education. So if they are able to recruit some of these indigenes, what it means is that the children will be able to attend school and will be taught in their own communities, and they wouldn't have to be transported, to another community. Another issue, another way that the government is also trying to deal with the situation is also to improve on the infrastructure in some of these communities. Because one, we told that there are inadequate teachers in some of these island communities. Secondly, also teachers, some teachers are not willing to take up, postings to some of these remote communities. So one, we are hoping to increase the number of teachers. Two, also increase the school infrastructure in some of these island communities. So these children will not be forced to join boats, to get on boats just to access education.
Right. Ghanaian journalist Maxwell Agbawa, thank you for your time today on Network Africa.
You're welcome, Jacob.
Over in Mali, a court has sentenced a man to death over the killing of 3 UN peacekeepers in the country's south in 2019. The accused, who was not named, was convicted of acts of terrorism, criminal association, murder, robbery, and illegal possession of firearms. The death penalty has not been applied in Mali since a moratorium on executions was put in place in 1980. In a statement, MINUSMA said this was the second time that specific attacks against its troops had been at the heart of a legal charge that has resulted in a trial and convictions. The MINUSMA peacekeeping force, which has had 12,000 troops in Mali since 2013, is the UN's largest and deadliest operation. And a court in the Gambia has dropped charges against 3 military officers alleged to have taken part in a coup plot last month. 2 civilians who had been detained were also freed. However, another 4 military officers and 1 police officer, including alleged ringleader Lance Corporal Sana Fadera, will face new charges next week. They did not enter a plea during their last court appearance. Malawi has recorded more than 1,000 cholera deaths since the outbreak started in March last year. This is the highest figure the country has ever recorded for a cholera outbreak. There are fears health officials are struggling to contain the outbreak as they are running low on medical supplies, including vaccines, most of which were used up last week. More than 30,000 infections have been reported in the country. Most cases and deaths have been recorded in the capital, Lilongwe, and Blantyre, where the opening of schools was delayed to control the spread. The widespread cases are linked to the impacts of climate change that caused extensive flooding last year and destroyed the country's water and sanitation systems. Health Minister Kumbize Chiponda has urged people to use safe water and observe basic hygiene, but very few people have access to safe water and improved sanitation facilities. 2 weeks ago, the country launched an international appeal asking for medical supplies to contain the outbreak. The Health Ministry has also asked the World Health Organization to assist them in getting 7.6 million doses of cholera vaccines. However, with only 2 manufacturers producing this vaccine and a global cholera outbreak, it might take a while to get things back on track. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is in Sudan on an official visit to the country for talks The country's military ruler, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. This morning, Mr. Abiy was welcomed by the military leader on arrival in the capital city, Khartoum. Ethiopia's state television, ETV, reported that the Prime Minister would discuss ways to bolster all-round relations between the two countries. The Prime Minister's office reports that during discussions, Mr. Abiy shared Ethiopia's solidarity with Sudan in the political dialogue process that they have embarked upon. Sudan's military and civilian groups have been in long-running negotiations to end the political crisis that followed the October 2021 coup. Relations between Ethiopia and Sudan are thawing after years of tensions over a fertile agricultural land in Al-Fashaga border area and the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The International Monetary Fund's director has arrived in Rwanda for a two-day visit to support building resilience on climate. According to local media, Kristalina Georgieva is expected to attend a roundtable discussion on climate change financing with East African finance ministers and governors of central banks. She announced on social media that she was looking forward to hearing local and regional perspectives on how the IMF can be even more helpful, especially in boosting climate resilience. Ms. Georgieva's visit comes after the IMF, under a new facility, approved a $319 million fund to Rwanda, the first African state to get the fund to build climate change resilience. Meanwhile, Ms. Georgieva also visited Zambia, where she discussed recent economic developments and progress in the country. The IMF chief met with students at the University of Zambia in Lusaka, as well as opening an International Monetary Fund office in the African country's capital.
The theme for this...
Over the last years, we have experienced two unthinkable events. First, COVID, that brought the world economy to a standstill for a prolonged period of time. Second, the invasion by Russia of Ukraine.
European Union migration ministers are meeting in Stockholm to discuss visa restrictions and better coordination inside the bloc to be able to send more people with no right to asylum in Europe back to their home countries, including Iraq. 3 years after the 27-nation EU agreed to restrict visas for countries deemed failing to cooperate on taking their people back, only Gambia has been formally punished. The EU's Executive European Commission proposed similar steps vis-à-vis Iraq, Senegal and Bangladesh, though two EU officials said cooperation with Dakar on returning people has since improved. Still, the EU's overall rate of effective returns stood at 21% in 2021. That's according to the latest available Eurostat data.
We have a serious situation when it comes to migration in Europe. We see increased irregular arrivals. And during the Home Affairs part of the meeting, we will focus on the external dimension and, in particular, on the issue of returns. Returning those who have been denied asylum in Europe is a really important issue, and I think that the Europe could do better. So I look forward to the discussion on this.
We also have an acute situation where we have a huge increase of irregular arrivals of migrants. But even though we had around 300,000 irregular arrivals last year, but we had last year almost 1 million asylum applications, 924,000 asylum applications in the European Union. And that means that we have 3 times more asylum applications than irregular arrivals. And these are overloading the reception capacities. And many of those are not in need of international protection. That's why I very much welcome that the Swedish presidency now will focus on returns. We have a very low return rate, and I can see that we can do significant progress here to increase the numbers of returns and have it more effective and quicker. So I think this is one of the most important things that we need to strengthen, and we do not need to wait for the legislation on the pact to be able to do that.
The United States government has announced a visa ban on some unnamed Nigerians for undermining the democratic process in a recent Nigerian election. In a statement, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken described the action as a reflection of his government's commitment to supporting Nigeria's aspiration to combat corruption and strengthen democracy and the rule of law. The senior U.S. diplomat explained that the individuals affected will not be granted visas to enter the U.S. under a policy to restrict visas of those believed to be responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Nigeria. He adds that their family members may also be subject to these restrictions. The statement adds additional persons who undermine the democratic process in Nigeria, including in the lead up to, during and following Nigeria's 2023 elections, may be found ineligible for U.S. visas under this policy. Mr. Blinken, however, clarified that the visa ban was not targeted at the Nigerian people or the government. Let's get more on this, and we're joined by Professor Chris Keke, Director, African Center for the Study of United States, University of Pretoria in South Africa. You're welcome to the program today.
Thank you, and good evening to you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Certainly. So what do you make of this notice by the U.S. government? There are no names being mentioned here, I must add, and it seems really broad to talk about certain individuals. Do you think it would be more helpful for Nigeria's democratic process if the so-called politicians are named?
Well, this is just a first step, and it is not surprising given the renewed commitment of the U.S. to promoting democracy in Africa as espoused in their 2022 U.S. Africa strategy. So ordinarily, we should be frowning at this as some form of election interference, especially when you consider that the U.S. is using moral right to lecture anyone about democracy, given the democratic backsliding and its dysfunctional domestic politics that's reflected in the constant unproductive contestation between Democrats and Republicans, which until recently has not done much for ordinary Americans. However, given that our politicians and leaders are shameless and seek power at all costs to satisfy their avarice, it is a welcome development. And the Nigerian politicians need to start learning that there are consequences, even if at the global level, for everything that they do or do not do, especially in an increasingly digital world which fosters accountability.
Some Nigerians may snare at this, saying that the U.S. assumes every Nigerian wants to go to America. While this visa ban is not targeted at everyone, as stated in that statement, just those erring politicians, it presupposes, doesn't it, that the U.S. is more concerned about our elections than we are, since, in the end, there seems to be no consequences by the electoral body, no authorities concerned about politicians meddling with the electoral process.
Yes, absolutely. But it's this concern, starts at the top of leadership, and that's why I talked about the shamelessness of our politicians and our leaders. The fact is, majority of the people who vie for elective positions in Nigeria do not understand what governance is about. They have a perverse understanding of governance and leadership opportunities for they see these as serving opportunities for serving themselves instead of the people that they are meant to serve for the common good of all and that of the state in general. So there's also no sense of the state and what the state actually means and what it's supposed to be doing. This perverse understanding of state and governance explains why many of them, especially those of them that are Christians, sometimes celebrate victory in church as if they've won the lottery, because technically in their minds, that is what has happened to them. And that's why our so-called leaders will never put policy in place, to enable electoral accountability, because, they are all involved. And I can tell you this. This is just the beginning of the efforts, like I said before, because the US and their allies will do much more to ensure that we have free and fair elections in Nigeria next month. They did the same thing, if I recollect correctly, in Zambia, in 2021. They threatened to sanction officials of the then ruling party of the former President Edgar Lungu if they tried to rig the 2021 elections. And they did not rig that election. That was how the current president, Hakainde Hichilema, a one-time jailed opposition leader, won election and has since been pursuing democratic and economic reforms that are yielding tangible benefits for a lot of Zambians. So Nigeria should not be cynical, about this. It will have the desired effects on politicians and their family members who still need to go to Europe and North America for healthcare, send their children, to schools there, and who have stashed, looted wealth in these countries. I've argued, previously that the US should also actually introduce legislation to make it impossible to invest or use looted funds in the US and in the European Union, and they're already taking action in this regard.
Right. So that you said, mentioning Europe and, elsewhere in the world, because the United States is usually not the only country announcing these bans. The UK and the EU will as well. So how can the electoral institutions be strengthened to curb such meddling in elections while still encouraging people to participate in the process, even as fears arise over electoral violence?
Well, it starts from the top with the president of the country, and I must actually commend very rarely President Buhari for setting the tone. He has actually communicated this quite clearly, severally, and through his words, his actions, and even body language, that he wants to bequeath a free and fair election and strong electoral management processes in Nigeria. I believe him, and the INEC has also put measures in place to ensure, a smooth election. So my reasoning is, if the president won't authorize the use of security forces to engage in voter suppression, which oftentimes can lead to electoral violence, then we can also trust that the fringe elements who decide to interfere illegally on their own will have consequences to face. So what is actually left now for me is the human factor, and that's critical. So if the people are resolute that their votes will count and they come out in large numbers to vote and protect their votes, then their votes will count. Second, there are also people, and I'm talking about ordinary Nigerians now, who are still steeped in doing things the way they used to do previously on election day. And these people will surely impact the process. We can only hope that they do not impact it so much as to then alter the outcome of the elections.
Right. Director, African Center for the Study of United States, University of Pretoria, Professor Keke, thank you for your time today on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Let's move on. The U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Ms. Janet Yellen, is in South Africa on a working visit. She addressed the media today with South Africa's Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, ahead of bilateral talks. Areas of cooperation and mutual benefit between the two economies are on the agenda, which also includes talks on progress with South Africa's energy transition. Ms. Yellen's Africa tour, which began in Senegal, is set to be a follow-up from the U.S. African Leaders Summit in December, where President Joe Biden made commitments to support African economies. She's also to visit a Ford Motor Company assembly plant outside Pretoria. The facility, which employs more than 4,000 people, is slated to become carbon neutral by next year.
As you know, South Africa is the first country with a Just Energy Transition Partnership, or JETP, to which the United States was proud to commit as a partner. This partnership represents South Africa's bold first step toward expanding electricity access and reliability. and creating a low-carbon and climate-resilient economy, a move that I believe will alleviate the deep fiscal strain the energy sector is putting on South Africa's economy and support strong economic growth. The partnership will also invest in the jobs of growing industries so that the transition is just and does not leave anyone behind. I've appreciated the minister's cooperation and insightful views in our talks so far.
I'm equally pleased by the announcements that you made yesterday that the USA Secretary and South Africa's National Treasury are committing to form a joint task force on combating financing of wildlife trafficking. I believe that Ms. Yellen and I will have fruitful discussion today on a number of issues, including anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism, climate financing, sovereign debt resolution in Africa, and other global issues which are going to be part of the G20 next month.
Meanwhile, South Africa's main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, has led some members of the public on a protest march to the headquarters of the ruling African National Congress. The demonstration is over the ongoing power crisis in the country. The march comes just a few days after the National Energy Regulator of South Africa granted the power utility Eskom an 18.65% electricity tariff hike, which the president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, has appealed to be put on hold. That's Network Africa. Thank you for watching today. I'm Keke Rogers.